I know you've got that big story idea that you've been thinking about, dreaming about for months, probably years. And I also know that you've got anywhere from 1 to 10 voices in your head telling you various versions of why you can't create that story. Well, my friends, lucky for you, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's episode. Welcome to the Storytelling Lab, where we break down the art and science of storytelling. My name is Bennett. I'm your host, and I'm a filmmaker and an author on a quest to understand how we can tell better stories so that we can do better work and make the world a better place. Each episode, I host one of the world's best storytellers to help you understand how to leverage storytelling to increase your sales, deepen your connections, and serve your audiences better. What's up, storytellers? Welcome back to the Storytelling Lab podcast. This is episode 180. It is the final episode of 2024. It is the final episode of season 12, which has been an incredible season. And you know, here on the show, we talk about the story that you tell others. We talk about the stories that others tell about you, but almost always, each and every episode, no matter who the storytelling guest is, we tend to come back to the most important story, in my opinion, the story that you tell yourself. Now, let me tell you a little story about myself. I am a documentary filmmaker by trade. I've done that for 20 years, but I've always been a big film buff, and I've always wanted to transition my career into that realm. And I've done a couple of short films. Some of them have won awards. Some of them have won screenwriting awards. But there are many stories that have been buried in my head for years, about a decade, some more maybe. And I've gone through life, having kids, raising a family, starting businesses, creating video projects for clients, writing books, starting a podcast, etc., etc. And those have continued to stay on the shelf in the back of my head, and I'm sick of it. So I'm ready to start writing these stories. I am ready to make this transition in my career. Some of these films I may produce and direct myself. Some I may see if someone else wants to buy them and produce them. Some may never see the light of day. Most, actually, is how that ratio works out. But I am on the third screenplay of this year because I have dedicated myself to the craft of writing these scripts this year, and I have been really diligent. I am averaging 5 to 6 days a week, about 5.5 days a week. If you look at it, I have a big calendar over there on my wall, and I mark off every day that I write. And it's been great. I am on pace to hopefully finish the third one, although we're running out of time and we're here upon the holiday season. But suffice it to say, by very early next year, I will have completed the third one. I'm going to break down today all the lessons I've learned by doing this, not being able to write a single feature screenplay for 10 years, even though I had all the desire in the world within me, to actually sitting down here at the desk, the one I'm sitting at this very moment, and producing not one, not two, but about 2.5 as of this very moment right now, and I will complete that one soon. A lot of different lessons that I've learned, and I'm sure that you have stories that you want to tell as well. Big stories inside of you. Now, they might not be a screenplay. They might. It might be a novel. It might be a nonfiction book, your self-help book. It may be a storytelling book. It may be any big project that your heart has been craving to create, but your head has been telling you why you can't or why you shouldn't. And I'm going to give you some insights today into how you can if you really want to, because that's the position I have been in, and I'm really excited, to be honest. I'm very proud, and I don't mind saying that. I'm very proud that I've finally found the recipe to be able to move forward. So I've got 3 different screenplays we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to break down one central lesson that I have learned from each of them. Okay, so the first screenplay is a horror screenplay. I'm super excited about that. It is set as kind of a backwoods, swampy horror film, slasher film type, and it's set on the islands of the coast of North Carolina, which certainly are popular now because of the Netflix hit show Outer Banks. But there's so much lore and legends and folk tales and ghost stories of that area where I grew up that a lot of my work is based in that area. But I was really excited to create this what I think is a unique take on the typical horror film where a group of people go out into the woods or wherever for a week or a weekend and they get chased by some monster that we don't know about until further along in the story. Now, the main thing that I learned in this first screenplay at the beginning of the year, I started in January. I gave myself 4 months to try to complete each screenplay, totaling in 3 for the year. And not just the first draft, and maybe not the final draft either, to be fair, but a couple of iterations. So this one I think I had 3 or 4 versions of that I have created. So it's not just that first vomit draft that you hear about. I gave myself a little bit higher bar. This one I was able to complete within that 4-month period quite easily, I would say, but that is because of one thing, 2 parts of one thing. One, I had already been thinking about this story for a long, long time. I had been fleshing out the story in my mind, the characters, the arc, the twist, the turns, the antagonist, the themes, all of these things I had been thinking about, whether if I was driving, if I was, on vacation when I shouldn't have been, don't tell my wife. Any time that I had free time that I was thinking about it, I had already started planning out the story. So when I sat down, it was pretty easy to write it because I had already effectively written at least the outline in my head. And that's a tactic that a lot of writers do. And it makes it easier when you finally do sit down because you know where you want to go with it. This is not always the case, but it was for me. However, I've had other stories that I had thought of very clearly in my head that I wasn't able to turn into a feature screenplay. So what was the difference this time? Absolutely consistency. We're going to start very simple. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was averaging this year averaged over 5 days a week consistently throughout the whole year, starting in January. How did I do that? It is very, very simple. My minimum requirement for showing up that day, and it started in one place and it lowered as that time went on. But when I started, I was like, I want to get 2 pages done a day. And I was committing to that for a week or 2, maybe 3, maybe the first month. I don't think it lasted that long. Anyways, the point is it did not last long at all before I realized, I just can't do that. There are some days I'm not going to be able to do that. However, instead of doing what I would typically do, which is I don't have enough time to really write and make a difference today, so I'll wait till tomorrow, and tomorrow turns into next week, and next week turns into next month, next year, and then the whole decade has passed and I haven't written any screenplays. So I made my minimum requirement for getting that big bright red X on my calendar and considering myself having shown up and produced for that day. I reduced that minimum requirement to 1 sentence. I couldn't just open the laptop. I couldn't just read about the screenplay. I had to write something and produce something, but it was 1 sentence. So there were nights when it was 9:30, 10 o'clock, and I'm getting ready to go to bed, might have been in the bed and tired, and I was like, crap, I didn't write today. And I just grabbed my laptop really quickly, opened it up, and wrote a sentence, and actually closed it, and I was done. And you may think that's silly, but here's exactly why it's not silly. Most of the time when I would do that, that 1 sentence would turn into a second sentence and maybe a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs. Sometimes it turned into the 2 pages that I really wanted in the back of my head. But what it did every time that I opened that laptop up and typed, no matter how much it was, if it was just the minimum of 1 sentence, is it got that ball inches more down the field. Not to make everything a sports analogy, but they say football is a game of inches. That's what that means. Yes, you're trying to get 100 yards. Yes, you're trying to get to the end of the screenplay. But how do you do it? 1 sentence at a time. And it's so cliche almost to hear people say that. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, one bite at a time. How do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. How do you write a feature screenplay? 1 sentence at a time. But we don't really act that out. We think, I need to write 2 pages. And then if we can't, we don't. But I could absolutely commit to 5.6 days a week at writing at minimum 1 sentence. And I did. And that's what allowed me to get to the finished version of that script by May, or by the end of April, so I could start one in May. So consistency. You have to find the recipe and understand how you can show up every day. Your minimum might not be mine. Your location might need to be somewhere else. You need to find the recipe, like what is going to make it easier for me to say yes to writing today. That's the key that you need to find. Okay, so the second screenplay was a little bit different. It was less thought out. It was less outlined in my head. I had a premise and I had a general idea of the characters and where I wanted it to go, but that was it. Some of this was based on, a lot of my writing is based on my lived experiences, but some of this maybe was a little too closely related to those experiences, and that doesn't always bode well for a good story because you marry yourself a little too much to the facts or how you remembered things or whatever. So I had to remove myself from that, and I found myself getting really stuck in this one. Stuck quite literally and metaphorically in Act 2. That is the toughest part of the film. It is the longest part of the story, not just the film, any story. It is, for the characters, the dark forest, the dark night of the soul, right? Act 2 is where you're really trudging through the mud and the muck and trying to find your way forward to overcome the problem that was established in Act 1. So I was struggling with Act 2 story-wise of understanding, where do the characters go? How do I get them from A to C? I think I know how I want the story to end. I clearly already have my beginning, but where do I go from there? And that part of my writing process, the middle part, was also the most challenging. So this one I didn't finish until into October. So that was in 6 months instead of the 4 that I wanted. Now, granted, I'll give myself a little bit of grace. Summertime was involved in that with 2 kids at home. Summertimes are hectic. But what I was really missing story-wise was understanding the characters. Once I found the consistency of my practice to show up every day, the story has the outline, that's great, but there's also that bit of magic of understanding the art behind the science of storytelling, right? And to do that, to leave space for the story to come to you instead of you trying to structure it to death, you have to fully understand your characters, and they have to be uniquely identifiable from one another. And when you can do that, you will understand what they need to happen to them for the next scene, for Act 2. What do they need to do to get to 3? Not just physically, but emotionally, of course. And when you do that, you reverse engineer it to understand, oh, well, then how do they need to behave in this scene? And you understand that Act 2 is really just one big chunky conduit to get you from the first moment of change that I call, which is the inciting incident, the change that happens to the character and sets them off on this journey, this problem they have to overcome. And the second change, the climax, which is the change that happens within the character. So what are the things that need to happen in between that? They can look different. They can be different scenes. They can be as zany as you want to, but they have to be moving them along that path somehow. And the decisions that they make need to be choices that reflect the character and their values. So having multiple characters in this film and already removing myself from who might have inspired those characters, because that is not the path, I had to really dive deep and understand, I can't just let the story happen. It's not going to work that way. I have to understand what version of the story each of my characters are living out. And when you do understand that, these answers eventually come to you. Or you can find another way if the plot doesn't work like that. Now that you understand your character well enough, and for whatever reason, this plot element and this plot element don't make sense together, you can find another way to solve that problem story-wise because you understand what the character needs and what they want, right? This is what drives all your decisions. So that part of churning through Act 2, which is always a struggle in life and in story, understanding the character as deeply as possible is everything. It's paramount. Okay, let's get into Screenplay 3. This one, my friends, is something I'm very excited about. I am adapting a book to a screenplay for the first time ever. This is the book, 21 Boxes, Robin's Story and the Tragedy of the Edenton Seven. Again, Eastern North Carolina. I am from Washington, North Carolina. Edenton is not too far away. And in the late 80s, early 90s, in the era of satanic panic, which was sweeping the nation, we had a case at a daycare in Edenton, North Carolina, that was completely for lack of a better word, insane, completely fabricated. All of these accusations of child and sexual abuse that ended in the arrest of 7 people, the Edenton 7, and took years of people's lives based on the confessions, or not confessions, but the interviews and interrogations of 3-year-olds that were saying things as ridiculous and fantastical and nonsensical as, oh, they took us out into the river and sharks were eating us. Things of that nature. So completely made up, yet the town of Edenton and the justice system did these people horribly wrong, including Robin, who is the central character, who was 18 years old with a baby at home, and they're spending years in jail and have never been exonerated. The case just got dismissed years later, 5 or 6 years later. So insane. I don't want to get into the nuances of that, but this is a true story that I really have to handle with care for 2 different reasons. One, you have to be respectful of someone's real life experience that was traumatic, deeply traumatic, okay? But 2, as I mentioned with the second screenplay, you can't just stick to the facts only. It's not a documentary. And there's too many characters in the real life, and it's too much inside baseball. So to tell a story in this fashion that is based on a true event, which is why in movies they say based on a true story or a true event, instead of like this is a depiction of that, because you have to take certain liberties. And that is very challenging when you're dealing with someone's life story. So that part is continuing to be challenging for me. I'm about 40 pages into the script, and for those of you who aren't familiar, for a 90-minute film, it's about a minute a page. So 90 to 100 pages, 2 hours would be 110, 120 pages. So I'm about a third of the way done right now, and I plan to spend some time over the Christmas holiday working on it. What I needed to do here, the third key to me understanding how to create stories in this long form. We got consistency first. You have to have that first. Then you have to understand your characters, especially when you get stuck in Act 2. And 3, for me, being able to achieve this goal that I set is comprehension. I have to understand, 1, what is the story in real life if I'm adapting this true story, in a way that I can craft a story so that 2, or 1B, my audience can comprehend it. My audience can understand it, because if they haven't read the book, I can't give them all the details of the book. This is why, this is an old cliche of people getting frustrated by, movies not being perfectly accurate portrayals of books. Well, it's impossible. It's impossible because a book might be 200, 400, 500,000 pages, and you just don't have the time in a movie. So you have to understand it so well that you can understand, well, do we really need 2 bad guys here? Couldn't we mold them into one? And yeah, you have to do that sometimes. Or understanding the story so well to know, I really love this scene, but does it need to be told? Does it progress the storyline of the screenplay for the film? Maybe not. Will the audience still put 2 and 2 together if we eliminate it? And if the answer is yes, then you need to eliminate it. If the answer is no, you need to find a way to communicate that part of the story. So comprehension is everything. Clarity is everything. And if you're getting input, like from a book that is helping inform your story, not just birthed out of your head, then you have to comprehend it at a level that you can clearly convey that same story, the same feelings, the same emotions, and the same general sequence of events to your audience. You have to understand it so well so that they can understand it easily. That's the takeaway right there, right? You have to understand your content so well that who you're teaching understands it easily. That's it. That's the line right there. I love that. It's the same thing if I'm giving a speech. You have to understand your story so well so that your audience can understand it easily. 3 screenplays, 3 separate lessons. I'm going to end you on this before you go off into your holiday. The fourth thing that I want you to focus on when you have these stories in your heart that your head has been preventing you from telling is you have to sit down and do the work daily. This goes back to the first point of consistency, right? But you have to show up and treat it like a professional. Now that does not mean 9 to 5 clock in every day because you have a day job perhaps, or you have other projects, paying projects that you're working on. But being a professional and treating it like a professional does not mean you have to work full time on it. It means when the time is available, you have to work on it like a professional, even if that minimum is 1 sentence. You have to show up and do it. Professionals don't always have 8 hours. Most professional writers don't write longer than 3 or 4 hours, at least the ones that I've talked to and had on the show. So you have to set up that system of doing it daily. It has to become a part of your being, like exercise, like investing your money. It has to be something that you are dollar cost averaging, right? Like you're doing it every day to some degree. You can't wait around for the mood to strike you. You can't wait around for motivation. You got to show up every day. And you have to show up on the long term. I'm writing 3 screenplays this year. I don't know if any of them will ever get made, and I don't care. Because here's the last point I'll leave you on. You have to show up every day and produce because you need the reps, right? And that is because you need the data from those reps. You can't take one shot in the dark, one stab at it with your one idea and it not work and learn anything from that, except, this is the worst case scenario, learn or feel like you learned, I'm not good enough to do it. If you are a Major League Baseball player, you don't lose your mind over striking out because you're going to strike out more times than you're going to hit, right? All-stars hit at 30%. Think about that. You need so many reps so that you can look at the data and understand, oh, well, what stories or what sentences hit? Which ones work? Which ones am I good at? Which ones sound like me and my tone of voice as an actor, as a writer? When you're first starting out, you're emulating the people you look up to. It takes a long time to find your voice. You need the data. You need the reps. You have to show up daily, not just because I'm telling you to, not just because that's the way that you get something done, which it is, but because you need the data. It's all data. It's all learnings. And if you have 3 learnings, it doesn't tell you anything. Even if those 3 learnings are unanimous and it's the same point. Because if you did 97 more, they might be the opposite. And so instead of thinking that you have a 100% success rate at one thing, it's actually 3%. And you just don't know. You start to know the picture with 3, but you have to keep going because you need a big data pool. Now, if I'm boring you because this is the science part of it, then sorry. Art and science are married together, and you should know that if you are a fan, a subscriber, or a listener to the Storytelling Lab podcast. That's a great place to end today, folks. Listen, we had a great year this year. I love this show. I love you all for listening and participating and sharing your thoughts and what you want to hear more of and what you enjoyed about each episode. It thrills me. Please continue to do that. Please send me suggestions if you have them. Please send me questions if you have them. Like, follow, subscribe, review, share. And if nothing else, just show up. Just show up. I wish you all the success in your storytelling ventures, whatever that may be. And if you need any kind of help at all, I'm here to give it to you. Peace and love, everybody. Have a great rest of your year, and I'll see you in 2025. My name is Bennett. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed that episode, do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. If you're already a subscriber and you're enjoying the show, give us a review and let us know the value that you've gotten from it. We love to hear from our listeners and learn about the benefits that they're getting from the show. That's what fuels us, and that's what fuels the show. And if you've already subscribed and you've already reviewed it and you think there's someone else that would benefit from listening to this show, please share it with them. The more we grow, the more we can help you grow, and that's what we're here to do. Join us next time on the Storytelling Lab. This podcast is a 6 Second Stories production. 6 Second Stories is a story coaching and consulting company that builds online education, in-person and virtual training, and digital products that help businesses master storytelling to find their ideal customers and market to them effectively. You can learn more at 6secondstories.com and purchase the book 6 Second Stories at Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, or rainbennett.com/6secondstories.